Joining us now, political strategist and commentator, former senior GOP congressional aide Rina Shah, and former Congresswoman Donna Edwards. She is an MSNBC political analyst. So, Rina, did you see a different Donald Trump last night?
I saw the same person who's got the same inner core, but with perhaps a little bit of a different shell this time. More subdued, more calm, and seemingly more even, but rambling in a way that lost me at some point. I was ready to listen, and the detailing of the assassination attempt, I just felt like I was listening to my uncle after a heavy Thanksgiving dinner. It was like, when are you going to stop, buddy? What is going on here? It was too much. It was just too much to hang on to. And then I saw the old Donald Trump come out, and there you have it. He's the same person, unchanged.
And so, Donna, sources meanwhile say that the President Biden, is furious at efforts to force him out of the presidential race. How do you see that being, going forward? And it struck me as though a lot of these efforts are going on precisely when the Republicans are holding their convention and the president, is in his house with COVID. It just seems as though these efforts continue regardless of what is happening outside of the political bubble in Washington.
Well, I have to say, listening to the former president last night and his rambling, his continued lies, his election denying, his vitriol, his divisiveness, that's the sort of thing that Democrats really should be focused in right now, in really challenging and showing the contrast with the president. And I have to tell you, I can understand President Biden's fury because he's earned the nomination. He's been a successful president. And I think that but for all the media attention and otherwise continuing this conversation for the last 3.5 weeks has actually been even more damaging. And frankly, I think the president is mirroring some of the fury that I hear from Democrats on the ground, organizers, people who are trying to get work done, who are having money withheld from them in this kind of state of inertia. So I understand the president's fury, but for Democrats, they needed to see last night to keep their eye on the prize. And the prize is going after Donald Trump for his lies and his vitriol.
So, Donna, and you talk about how the media attention, there's no doubt there's been a lot of media attention on this, these efforts. But a lot of this media attention is based on, press releases that members of Congress put out saying that and letters, Zoe Lofgren just sent a letter to the president of the United States, asking him to step aside. In other words, these are real efforts going on, and they have been going on for some time. And I'm just wondering, Donna, where is, there's the dichotomy that you're talking about people on the ground, in the ground, activists and Democrats who feel one way. But then it seems like many people in Washington and, in other places see it differently.
Look, I'm not going to disparage my former colleagues. I believe that each of them, as they've spoken out, have done so out of a deep respect for the president. I just don't happen to agree with them that this is the right course. I will say that I think, had these conversations privately taken place, 3 weeks ago, or frankly, if they had taken place a year and a half ago, we'd be in a completely different position than we're in right now. And I think that what has happened is that putting all of this out in the public, going at the president, sometimes in some gratuitous kinds of ways from some of the statements that I've read, that you can understand that the president will dig his heels in. He is a fighter from Scranton, after all. And so that doesn't surprise me. But I think it's potentially very damaging, no matter who the nominee is. Look, I think Democrats are going to rally around the president. They're going to rally around who's at the top of that ticket. But the long-term damage, I think, has been done by a conversation that started out mostly, obviously, from the president's debate performance, but driven by donors, driven by the media, and now joined in by members of Congress.
Rina, what do you think the president and his supporters can expect, and what could they do now to, as Donna was saying, the need for the Democrats to refocus on Donald Trump? How can they do that in this current environment?
Well, one thing last night showed me is that Donald Trump is extremely vulnerable. And if I were advising the Republicans, which I am not right now, I would just say that the one thing you've got to do between now and November is protect strength, especially if Biden remains at the top of the ticket. After last night, I do not believe this ticket, the Trump-Vance ticket, is capable of doing that. J.D. Vance is clearly just going to follow Trump's lead all the way into Election Day. He's pretty weak if you look at him, and they don't want him talking about social issues because he becomes a bigger liability there and will have to answer for his past missteps. So to the Democrats listening, I have to say this. No matter what's happening on your side, there's one goal here. And for a lot of moderate Republicans out there and independents who are all up for grabs, there's also a bigger job, and it's to defeat Trumpism writ large, to keep him out of the White House. He would be a disaster for the American public. There's the reason he was kicked out in 2020. And the numbers, no matter what happens again with Biden, are on the side of the Democrats. But the reality is that the infighting has to stop making itself public. It does tend to give Republicans a little bit more gas for their motor. And so I want to really close by leaving folks with this a sense of hope. If it does come to a brokered convention, remember that two of our country's best presidents came out of brokered conventions. Abe Lincoln, my favorite president of all time, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR was arguably one of the most influential presidents in modern history. And so do not be as scared of the unknown. Conventions are made for exciting democracy in action moments. Yes, everybody wants to respect people who've done the work, who care about this country, but real leadership sometimes takes making tough decisions. But putting my hat back on for just a moment, Jose, if I were advising the Republicans, I also have one message to send to them. And it's, if you want to win in November, you need to dump Trump. He should have spoken on day one so everybody could see what is a disaster he is in real time. He doesn't deserve to be at the top of the ticket. He should be replaced. In fact, the whole ticket, Trump-Vance, should be eliminated. And I wish the Republicans could go back so that they would give the Democrats a real race here. The Republicans are behind the right now in the game after this convention. I don't think they're sitting very pretty. They need to replace their ticket as well.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.